Hey guys, tonight we are painting the world. The city is grey stone and brown mud, but inside this workshop, the vats are boiling with liquid jewels. We are joining the medieval dyer. We are going to explore the chemistry that separated the kings from the peasants. This is a story about steam, chemistry, and the magic of color. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, watch the steam rise, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun has not yet broken over the eastern wall of the city, but the dyer's district is already awake. You can hear it before you see it. The crackling of wood feeding hungry flames, the deep, rhythmic bubbling of water that has been brought past boiling, the splash and slosh of heavy paddles stirring vats that hold more liquid than most people will see in a month. And beneath it all, a low murmur of voices, men and women calling to one another in the half-light, coordinating the dance that will turn raw wool into something worth more than silver. The streets here are narrow. The buildings lean toward one another like old friends sharing secrets. Their upper stories jut out over the cobblestones, blocking what little sky manages to penetrate this far into the tangled heart of the medieval city. The air is thick, not just with the smell, though that comes soon enough, but with moisture, with humidity, the kind of wet heat that clings to your skin and makes your clothes heavy before you've taken 10 steps. Every breath you draw is warm, almost liquid, coating the inside of your throat with the essence of this place. And the smell. Oh, the smell is everything. It hits you in waves, layering one scent over another until you cannot separate them anymore. Wet wool, yes, that familiar lanolin richness that speaks of sheep and rain, and the countryside that feels so far away from these stone walls. Wood smoke, sharp and clean, the scent of oak and ash burning hot and fast to bring the great vats to their roiling fury. But underneath, woven through it all like threads in a tapestry, there are other scents. Mineral scents. Chemical scents. The sharp tang of alum. The acrid bite of something that might be stale urine, though no one speaks of it directly. The earthy, almost sweet aroma of roots being crushed into powder. And over everything, the pervasive, inescapable scent of steam, of water transformed into mist, carrying with it every other smell this place can offer. The river runs past the edge of the district. You can see it from certain angles, between buildings, down alleys that open suddenly onto the water. In most parts of the city, the river runs grey or brown, reflecting the color of the sky or the mud of its own banks. But here it runs different. Today, perhaps, it carries a faint blush of pink, a delicate rose color that swirls and eddies around the stones at the water's edge. Tomorrow it might run pale yellow, the color of weak sunlight filtering through autumn leaves. The day after, a ghostly grey blue, like storm clouds reflected in still water. The river tells the story of what is happening in the workshops that line its banks. Every bucket of spent dye bath that gets poured away, every rinse of freshly colored wool, every emptying of a vat that has given all it can give, all of it ends up here, staining the water in a constantly shifting palette of hues. The dyers choose this location with care. The river provides what they need most: water. Endless, flowing water to fill the vats, to rinse the wool, to wash away the excess dye, to cool the fibers after their scalding baths. The current takes away what they no longer need, carrying it downstream, out of mind, out of sight. And the river brings something else too: access. Boats can navigate these waters, bringing supplies from far away, the alum from distant mines, the exotic dyestuffs from lands most here will never see. The fuel, the wool, the mordants, everything flows along the river to this place where transformation happens. You step deeper into the district now, moving past the first row of buildings and into the heart of the workshops. The heat intensifies with every step. It is not the dry heat of a summer day or even the focused heat of a blacksmith's forge. This is wet heat, humid heat, the kind that makes the air shimmer and dance, that turns solid stone walls into wavering, uncertain things at the edges of your vision. Your skin grows slick with it. A fine sheen of moisture appears on your forehead, your neck, the backs of your hands. It is impossible to tell where your own sweat ends and the ambient moisture begins. The workshops themselves are open to the air on one side, great arched doorways that allow the steam to escape and fresh air to flow in, though that air is warm itself, heated by the proximity of so many fires, so much boiling water. Inside, the space is dominated by the vats. They are enormous, these vessels, cast from copper, hammered and shaped by craftsmen who understand the properties of metal the way a dyer understands color. Each vat is perhaps 4 feet across at the mouth, deep enough that a man could stand inside it, and only his head and shoulders would show above the rim. The copper gleams in the firelight, burnished to a warm gold, though the heat and the constant exposure to dyes have left their marks. Streaks of green where the copper has oxidized. Phantom stains of red, blue, yellow, the ghosts of 1,000 dye baths that have come before. Beneath each vat, a fire burns. These are not small fires, not the delicate flames of a candle or even the modest crackling of a hearth fire. These are working fires, roaring fires, flames that leap and dance with fierce appetite, consuming wood as fast as it can be fed into them. The heat they produce is extraordinary. Stand too close, and you can feel it like a physical pressure against your skin, pushing you back, warning you away. The workers here have learned to move around these fires with practiced ease, tending them, adjusting them, maintaining the precise level of heat needed for each stage of the dyeing process. The wood crackles and pops as it burns. You can hear individual pieces splitting, the sound sharp and sudden against the deeper roar of the flames. Smoke rises from the fires, but it does not linger. The heat of the flames drives it upward with such force that it shoots toward the high ceiling, where openings allow it to escape into the sky above. The workshop fills with this upward rush of hot air, creating currents and eddies that make the whole space feel alive, breathing, pulsing with energy. And the water in the vats is not merely hot. It is boiling, not just on the surface, but throughout, a rolling, turbulent boil that sends bubbles racing from the bottom of the vat to burst at the surface in endless succession. The sound is constant, omnipresent, a deep, wet bubbling that fills your ears, that becomes the baseline rhythm of this place. Sometimes it is punctuated by larger eruptions, moments when the boiling intensifies and a great surge of bubbles breaks the surface all at once, sending up a fresh plume of steam. The steam, it is everywhere. It rises from the vats in thick white clouds, billowing upward in mushroom shapes that expand and dissipate as they climb toward the ceiling. The steam is so dense that it obscures vision, turning the far end of the workshop into a mysterious, hazy realm where figures move like ghosts, their forms indistinct, their movements slow and dreamlike through the moisture-laden air. When you walk through these clouds of steam, they envelop you, coating your face with a film of water, condensing on your eyelashes, making everything glisten and shine. The heat and the steam together create an atmosphere unlike anywhere else in the medieval world. This is not a place of comfort. It is a place of work. Hard, physical, demanding work that requires strength and endurance and a willingness to exist in this humid, scalding environment for hours at a time. The workers here strip down to loose tunics, the fabric already soaked through with sweat and steam, clinging to their bodies. They move with purpose, with skill, navigating between the fires and the vats, adjusting, checking, stirring, monitoring. There is a choreography to it all. One worker tends the fires, adding wood at precise intervals, pushing the burning logs into better positions with a long iron poker, maintaining that crucial balance between too much heat and too little. Another watches the vats, observing the way the water boils, the size and frequency of the bubbles, reading in these signs the exact temperature and readiness of each bath. A third prepares the materials that will go into the vats, handling the wool, the mordants, the dyestuffs themselves, measuring and weighing with practiced eyes. The wool arrives at the workshop in its raw state. It has been shorn from sheep, cleaned of the worst of the dirt and debris, but it is still greasy with lanolin, still carrying the smell of the animal and the field. It is white, or more accurately, cream-colored, a natural ivory that seems to glow softly in the firelight. This is the canvas. This is what everything else is built upon. The purity of this white, the receptiveness of these fibers, will determine the final quality of the dyed wool. But before any color can be applied, before a single grain of dye stuff touches these fibers, there is another step. The mordant, the fixer, the secret that separates good dyeing from great dyeing, that turns fugitive colors into permanent ones, that makes the difference between cloth that fades after one season and cloth that holds its hue for generations. The mordant vat sits slightly apart from the dye vats, and the preparation of it is a process that requires knowledge, precision, and a willingness to work with substances that most people would find unpleasant. The primary mordant, the one used for nearly all dyeing work, is alum. It arrives at the workshop as rough crystals, chunks of mineral mined from deposits far away, transported at great expense to cities across Europe. These crystals are not uniform. They range in size from tiny grains to pieces as large as a fist, and they vary in color from pure white to pale pink to a watery gray. The dyer takes these crystals and grinds them. There is a mortar for this purpose, carved from a single piece of stone, worn smooth by years of use. The pestle is equally ancient, heavy enough to require 2 hands to lift, its weight doing most of the work of crushing the crystalline alum into powder. The grinding is rhythmic. Lift the pestle. Bring it down into the mortar with controlled force. Feel the crystals crunch and splinter beneath the impact. Rotate the pestle. Grind the fragments against the bottom of the mortar with a circular motion. Lift again. Repeat. Over and over, the sound of stone on stone, of crystals breaking, filling the air with a different kind of rhythm than the bubbling of the vats. The alum powder is measured into the mordant vat. The proportions matter. Too little and the wool will not take the dye properly. The colors will be pale, weak, prone to fading. Too much and the wool itself can be damaged, the fibers becoming brittle, losing their strength and softness. The dyer knows these proportions in his bones, learned through years of apprenticeship, refined through countless batches of wool, both successful and failed. But alum alone is not always enough. For certain colors, for certain effects, another ingredient is needed. And this is where the work becomes less pleasant, where noses wrinkle and workers breathe through their mouths. Urine. Specifically, stale urine. Not fresh, but aged, allowed to sit in sealed containers for days or weeks until the natural processes of decomposition have transformed it into something with very different chemical properties. The smell when these containers are opened is sharp, ammonia-rich, eye-watering. It cuts through even the other sense of the workshop, asserting itself with brutal honesty. The urine is added to the mordant bath. Not much. A measured amount, enough to change the chemistry of the solution without overwhelming it. The workers do not speak of this ingredient. It is understood, accepted, but not discussed. This is the secret that never appears in guild records, that is passed down through demonstration rather than explanation. Every dyer uses it. Every dyer knows why. But it remains one of those things that exists in the gap between the public face of the craft and the messy reality of the work. The mordant bath is heated, not to boiling, but to a sustained, steady heat that falls just short of that threshold. The water shimmers, tiny bubbles forming on the sides of the vat and rising slowly to the surface, but without the violent roiling of a full boil. The alum dissolves, turning the water faintly cloudy, giving it a slippery, slightly greasy texture when you dip your fingers in to test it. And then the wool goes in. Great skeins of it, twisted and tied to keep them from tangling, are lowered into the hot, mordant bath. The water level rises as the wool displaces it. At first, the wool floats, buoyed by the air trapped between its fibers. But slowly, as the hot water penetrates, the wool begins to sink, growing heavy, absorbing the liquid and all the chemistry it carries. This is when the work truly begins. The wool cannot simply sit in the mordant bath. It must be kept moving, circulating, ensuring that every fiber has equal exposure to the alum solution. A long wooden paddle is brought into play, a tool worn smooth by handling, its edges rounded and darkened by water and heat. The dyer grips this paddle and begins to stir. The motion is deceptively simple. Slide the paddle down into the vat beneath the submerged wool. Lift upward, bringing some of the wool with you, exposing it briefly to the air before it slides back into the bath. Push down on one side, creating a current that makes the skeins rotate. Pull up on the other side, reversing the flow. The paddle moves in slow, deliberate circles, and the wool moves with it, a graceful underwater dance that belies the strength required to perform it. Because the paddle is heavy, the wool is heavy. The resistance of the hot water is considerable. The dyer's arms and shoulders work constantly, muscles flexing and releasing in that steady rhythm. Sweat runs down his face, drips from his chin. His breathing becomes deep and regular, timed to the motion of the paddle. This is not quick work. The wool must remain in the mordant bath for an hour, sometimes more, and throughout that time, the stirring continues, ensuring even treatment, preventing any part of the wool from settling to the bottom where it might scorch against the hot copper. The steam from the mordant vat mingles with the steam from the dye vats, creating layers and currents in the air above. Where the different streams of steam meet, they swirl together, creating temporary patterns that last only moments before dissipating into the general haze that fills the upper reaches of the workshop. The light that manages to penetrate from outside is transformed by this steam, becoming diffuse, soft, almost dreamlike. Dust motes and ash particles caught in the light create tiny galaxies that drift and spin in the turbulent air. After the prescribed time, the wool is lifted from the mordant bath. The paddles are used to hook beneath the skeins, raising them up so they can be grasped with wooden tongs and transferred to a rinsing trough. The mordanted wool is heavier now, saturated with water and alum. It drips steadily, creating a small stream that splashes into the trough, raising steam where the hot water meets the slightly cooler rinse water. The rinse is quick but thorough. Fresh water washes away the excess mordant, leaving behind only what has bonded to the fibers themselves. The wool is worked and squeezed, though never wrung or twisted, which might damage the fibers or create permanent wrinkles in the finished cloth. The rinse water quickly becomes cloudy, tinged with the faintest hint of the mordant, and it too will eventually find its way to the river, adding another subtle note to the waterway's ever-changing palette. Now the wool is ready. The fibers have been opened, prepared, made receptive to the dye. This is the threshold, the moment before transformation. The mordanted wool is set aside, still dripping, still steaming gently, while attention turns to the real magic of this place, the creation of color. The dye vats are prepared with the same care as the mordant bath, but the process is different, the ingredients more varied, the results more dramatic. Today, the color to be created is red. Not just any red, but a deep, rich blood red that speaks of wealth and power, that transforms simple wool into something precious enough to adorn the robes of merchants and clergy, perhaps even nobility if the quality is fine enough. The source of this red is madder, the roots of a plant that grows in fields far from the city, cultivated specifically for this purpose. The roots arrive at the workshop dried, bundles of them tied together, looking like nothing so much as brittle sticks gathered from beneath a tree. But these sticks hold within them the potential for transformation, a pigment so intense and so permanent that it has been prized for thousands of years. The preparation of madder begins with grinding, just as the alum was ground, but on a far larger scale. The dried roots must be broken down into the finest possible powder, exposing the maximum surface area of the material to the hot water of the dye bath. The mortar used for this is even larger than the one for alum, deep enough that the worker must reach down into it, wide enough that two people could work at it simultaneously if needed. The dried madder roots are placed in the mortar, and the grinding begins. The first strikes of the pestle crack the roots, splitting them lengthwise, revealing the orange-brown interior. The color is already there, visible as a faint stain on the broken edges, a promise of what is to come. More grinding, and the roots break into smaller pieces, splinters and fragments that scatter across the bottom of the mortar. The pestle crushes these fragments, pulverizes them, transforms them from brittle plant matter into something approaching powder. The work is dusty. With each impact of the pestle, a small cloud of orange particles rises into the air, catching the light, drifting on the currents created by the rising steam. The worker breathes through a cloth tied across his nose and mouth, protection against inhaling too much of this dust. The madder powder coats his hands, his forearms, anywhere the dust settles and sweat creates paste. His skin takes on an orange tinge, the pigment already demonstrating its staining power. The grinding continues for what feels like hours, though in reality it is perhaps less than one. The rhythm is meditative, hypnotic, the steady thump of the pestle, the gritty sound of plant matter being crushed to powder, the occasional pause to scrape the accumulated powder from the sides of the mortar back toward the center. The entire process is visible, tangible, a transformation happening in real time as roots become dust, as potential becomes possibility. When the grinding is complete, the madder powder is transferred to a large wooden bowl. It is a beautiful thing, this powder, a dusty orange color that shifts depending on how the light hits it. In some angles it appears almost yellow, in others distinctly red. It is dry and fine, with a texture like flour, though it carries a faintly earthy smell, the ghost of the plant it came from mixed with something else, something that hints at the color it will produce. The dye vat has been heating while the madder was being prepared. This vat is filled with fresh water, heated to just below boiling. The temperature is crucial. Too hot, and the madder can produce brownish tones instead of the desired red. Too cool, and the extraction of the dye will be incomplete, the color weak and pale. The dyer checks the heat constantly, dipping a finger just below the surface, feeling the water's temperature with practiced sensitivity. He adjusts the fire beneath, adding wood to increase heat, pulling burning logs aside to let it drop. When the temperature is right, the madder powder is added to the vat. It does not dissolve instantly. Instead, it floats on the surface at first, a dusty orange layer that bobs and swirls with the motion of the water beneath. But slowly, as the water's motion continues, the powder begins to sink, to disperse, to mingle with the liquid. The water's color shifts. At first it is barely noticeable, just a faint tinge, a hint of orange in the clear water. But the color deepens rapidly. Within minutes, the water has turned a rusty orange, the color of iron oxide, of autumn leaves at their peak. The transformation is mesmerizing. Watching the color spread and intensify, seeing the water change from transparent to opaque, from colorless to intensely hued. And still the color continues to deepen. The orange shifts toward red, first a bright, almost coral red, then darker, richer, moving through shades of rust and terracotta toward something deeper. The dyer stirs the vat, using that same long wooden paddle, keeping the madder particles in suspension, preventing them from settling to the bottom where they would be useless. The stirring creates currents in the colored water, eddies and swirls that show different intensities of color, lighter where the water has been lifted from the depths, darker where it pools and concentrates. The color shifts and flows like something alive, like blood moving through veins, pulsing with each movement of the paddle. And still the color deepens, from bright red to blood red, from blood red to the color of wine, from wine red to something approaching the color of old blood, of dried blood, a dark, almost brownish red that nonetheless holds within it an intensity that makes it glow in the firelight. This is the color that was promised in those dry roots. This is the transformation that justifies the labor, the heat, the skill. The mordanted wool is brought to the dye vat. The skeins are lowered carefully into the red liquid, and immediately they begin to change. The cream-colored wool drinks in the dye with apparent eagerness. You can watch the color spreading through the fibers, climbing along the individual strands like liquid seeking its level. The portions of the wool still above the surface remain pale, but the submerged portions bloom with color, transforming before your eyes. Now the real work begins. The stirring. The constant, rhythmic, exhausting work of keeping the wool in motion through the dye bath. The paddle slides beneath the wool, lifts it, turns it, submerges it again. The motion must be constant but gentle. Aggressive stirring could tangle the wool, could felt it, ruining the fibers. But without motion, the dye would absorb unevenly, creating patches of light and dark, ruining the batch just as surely. The dyer settles into the rhythm. His hands grip the paddle, finding the worn spots where generations of dyers before him have held this same tool. His body sways slightly with the motion, his weight shifting from foot to foot, distributing the load, preventing any one muscle group from exhausting too quickly. His breathing becomes deep and regular, timed to the motion of the paddle. Inhale as the paddle rises, lifting the wool. Exhale as it descends, pushing the wool back under the surface. The sound of the work fills the space, the splash and slosh of the water as it is displaced by the paddle, the heavy, wet sound of wool saturated with liquid being lifted and submerged, the bubbling of the vat, still heated though not quite to boiling, a gentler sound than the rolling boil of the mordant bath, but still present, still constant. And beneath it all, the crackle of the fire, the hiss of steam, the occasional drip of condensed moisture falling from the ceiling back to the floor. The steam rising from the dye vat is no longer white. It carries with it the finest particles of matter, too small to see individually, but collectively giving the steam a faint reddish tinge. When light passes through this colored steam, it takes on a warm, rosy glow, bathing the worker in what looks like sunset light, making even his sweat-sheened skin appear flushed and healthy rather than exhausted. Time loses its meaning in the heat and rhythm of the work. There are no clocks here, no bells marking the hours. Instead, time is measured in the changing color of the wool, in the ache building in the dyer's shoulders and arms, in the slow consumption of the wood feeding the fire beneath the vat. The wool darkens gradually, incrementally, each passage through the dye bath adding another layer of color, building the intensity pigment by pigment, molecule by molecule. The first half hour, the wool goes from cream to pale pink. Another 15 minutes and it is clearly red, though still a light, almost cheerful shade. As the time stretches toward an hour, the red deepens, becoming richer, more saturated. An hour and a half, and the wool has achieved that blood-red intensity that was the goal. But the dyer does not stop. He continues stirring, allowing the color to penetrate completely, to bond with every fiber, ensuring permanence, ensuring that this red will survive washing and wearing and the passage of years. The paddle is heavy. The dyer's arms burn with the sustained effort. Sweat runs freely now, dripping from his face into the dye bath, though such small contamination makes no difference to the chemistry at work. He shifts his grip on the paddle, giving different muscles a moment of relief, but the motion never stops. This is the heart of the craft, this sustained physical effort combined with intimate knowledge of materials and process. This is where skill separates itself from mere knowledge. Other workers in the shop move around him, tending to their own vats, their own batches of wool and dye. But there is a respect for this work, an acknowledgement of its difficulty. They give the dyer space. They do not disturb his rhythm. They understand that once begun, this process cannot be interrupted without risk of ruining the entire batch. The fire beneath the vat must be tended even as the stirring continues. Another worker takes responsibility for this, crouching beside the flames, adding wood when the heat begins to drop, using the iron poker to maintain the fire's structure, keeping it burning efficiently. The heat radiates outward, making the air shimmer, adding another layer to the already intense warmth of the workshop. The rhythm of the stirring is almost musical. Each movement of the paddle creates a note. The initial plunge makes a deep, hollow sound. The lift creates a cascade of water falling from the wool, a higher, more scattered sound. The rotation, the gentle push and pull, creates a softer sound, almost a whisper compared to the others. Together, these sounds create a pattern, a beat that other workers unconsciously synchronize with, a living pulse that binds the workshop together. The light in the workshop shifts as time passes. The sun, invisible behind the stone walls and the clouds of steam, moves across the sky. The angle of the light coming through the openings changes, creating new patterns of illumination and shadow. Where before the far end of the workshop was in darkness, now a shaft of sunlight penetrates, turning the steam there into gold. Where before a particular vat was fully lit, now it sits in relative shadow, the fire beneath it providing the primary illumination. Finally, after what feels like an eternity of stirring, the dyer judges the wool ready. The decision is based on multiple factors. The color of the wool, yes, but also its texture, the way it feels when lifted from the bath, the way the water drips from it. Experience guides this decision, a kind of knowledge that cannot be fully articulated, that exists in the realm of intuition born from years of practice. The wool is lifted from the dye vat one final time. It is heavy, swollen with water and dye, transformed utterly from the cream-colored fiber that entered the bath. Now it is the deep, rich red that was promised, the color so intense it seems to glow from within. The excess dye runs off in rivulets, streaming back into the vat, momentarily creating lighter trails in the dark water before the color evens out again. The dyed wool is transferred to the rinsing trough, just as the mordanted wool was. But this rinse is different. The water here will be stained with dye, will turn pink, and then red as the excess pigment is washed away. Multiple rinses will be needed, each one carrying away more of the loose dye until the water finally runs relatively clear, signaling that only the bonded dye remains. The first rinse water turns bright red almost instantly. It looks like blood has been spilled, like something violent has occurred. But this is just the excess matter washing away, the particles that clung to the surface of the fibers but did not penetrate, did not bond. The water is dumped, joining the stream that flows toward the river, adding its note of red to whatever color the river currently carries. The second rinse is paler, a rose pink that still holds intensity, but shows that much of the loose dye has already been removed. The wool is worked through this water, squeezed gently to encourage the rinse water to penetrate between the fibers, to reach every part of the skein. The third rinse is paler still, the faintest blush of pink. By the fourth or fifth rinse, the water remains nearly clear, with only the slightest tinge of color to show what has passed through it. The dyed wool is lifted from the final rinse and hung to dry. Wooden poles are suspended from the ceiling for this purpose, high enough that the dripping water falls harmlessly to the floor rather than creating puddles where workers walk. The skeins hang there, still heavy with water, still dripping steadily, but the color is set. The red is permanent now, bonded to the fibers through the chemical magic of the mordant and the heat and the skill of the dyer. And already, before this batch is even fully dry, the process begins again. Because there is always more wool to dye, always more color to create. The vats are never truly idle, the fires never fully extinguished. This is the rhythm of the dyer's workshop, the endless cycle of preparation and transformation, of white wool becoming colored treasure, of chemistry and craft combining to paint the medieval world in hues that defy the gray stone and brown mud that dominate outside these walls. The workers move through the space with practiced efficiency, their bodies adapted to the heat, their lungs accustomed to the steam-thick air. They are artists and chemists, laborers and magicians. They hold in their hands the power to transform, to create beauty, to make the rare and precious from the common and simple. And they do this day after day, batch after batch, sustaining themselves through the knowledge that what they create will outlast them, will carry their skill forward into a future they will never see, wrapped around the bodies of people they will never meet. adding color to a world that is always hungry for it. The woad vat sits in a different part of the workshop, separated from the heat and fury of the red dye station. This is deliberate, strategic, because woad requires something entirely different from madder. Where madder demanded heat, woad demands patience. Where madder required boiling and stirring and constant motion, woad asks for stillness, for waiting, for faith in processes that happen invisibly beneath the surface, guided by forces smaller than the eye can see. The vat itself is larger than the copper vessels used for madder. It is made of wood, oak planks fitted together so tightly that not a drop of liquid escapes, bound with iron hoops that have rusted to a deep orange-brown over years of exposure to the moisture that permeates this place. The wood is dark, stained by countless batches of woad, the grain highlighted by the absorption of pigment into its very fibers. If you were to split this vat open, you would find blue running through it like veins, the history of every dye bath it has ever held written into its substance. The smell from the woad vat is unlike anything else in the workshop. It is not the sharp chemical tang of alum. It is not the acrid bite of stale urine. It is not even the clean, woody scent of the fires. The woad vat smells earthy, organic. There is something almost agricultural about it, something that speaks of soil and rain and growing things. But there is also something else, something stranger. A fermented quality, like beer that has gone past drinkable, like bread dough that has been left to rise too long. It is not entirely pleasant, this smell, but it is not repulsive either. It is simply different, distinct, the kind of smell that marks this place as surely as the visual riot of colored wool. Because the woad vat is not heated, not in the way the madder vat is heated, with roaring flames beneath and water brought to boiling. The woad vat sits at room temperature, or perhaps slightly warmer, heated only by the ambient warmth of the workshop, by the proximity of all those other fires, by the summer sun beating down on the roof above. And inside this vat, invisible but constant, a different kind of transformation is taking place. The woad itself arrives at the workshop already partially processed. The leaves of the woad plant have been harvested in distant fields, crushed into a paste, formed into balls, and allowed to dry. These balls are rock hard when they arrive, dense and heavy, a dark greenish-gray color that gives no hint of the blue they contain. The dyer takes these balls and grinds them, just as the madder roots were ground, reducing them to powder. But this powder is only the beginning. The woad powder is mixed with water and other ingredients. Bran, to feed the fermentation. Sometimes honey or wine, to encourage the process. The mixture is poured into the vat and left to sit, left to ferment, left to undergo a transformation that is as much biological as chemical, driven by invisible organisms that consume the sugars in the mixture, and as a byproduct of their feeding, create the conditions necessary for the blue dye to form. This fermentation takes days, sometimes a week or more. The vat must be monitored, checked, adjusted. More bran might be added if the fermentation slows. The surface must be skimmed of the foam that forms there, a frothy layer that speaks to the activity happening below. And always the waiting. The patience required to let nature do its work, to resist the urge to intervene, to trust in processes that were ancient before this workshop existed, before this city was built, before the people who work here were born. The surface of the woad vat has a strange quality. When light hits it at certain angles, it shimmers with an iridescent sheen, like oil on water, like the wing of a beetle. Colors dance across this surface. Purple, green, copper, gold. A metallic rainbow that shifts and changes with the slightest movement of the air or the liquid beneath. This sheen is one of the signs that the vat is ready, that the fermentation has progressed to the point where it can accept wool and transform it. But the liquid itself, when you look down into the vat, is not blue. This is the first surprise, the first indication that woad works differently than other dyes. The liquid in the vat is yellow-green, a muddy, turbid yellow-green that looks more like stagnant pond water than anything that could produce the royal blue that woad is famous for. It is opaque, impossible to see into, the surface reflecting that strange metallic sheen while the depths remain mysterious. A dyer approaches the woad vat carrying wool. This wool has already been mordanted, already prepared, though the mordanting process for woad is gentler than for madder. The wool is cream-colored, clean, ready for transformation. But unlike the madder process, where the wool was immersed in a vat and stirred constantly, the woad process is different. The wool will be dipped, lowered into the vat on long wooden poles, pushed beneath the surface, held there, then raised again. No stirring, no agitation. Just careful, controlled immersion. The poles used for this are simple but essential. Long, straight lengths of wood, smoothed and oiled to prevent splinters, with notches carved near one end where the wool can be secured. The dyer attaches a skein of wool to a pole, wrapping the end of the skein through the notches, ensuring it is held firmly but can still be removed later. The pole is lifted, the weight of the wet wool testing the strength of whoever holds it. And then the descent begins. The pole is angled toward the vat, the wool-draped end lowering toward that yellow-green surface. There is a moment of hesitation, a final check that everything is positioned correctly, that the wool is secure, that the vat is ready. And then the wool touches the surface. It does not plunge in. Instead, it is lowered gently, eased through the metallic skin on the vat's surface with minimal disturbance. The liquid accepts the wool, pulling it down, the cream-colored fibers disappearing into that murky yellow-green. The pole continues to descend, angled to ensure the wool is pushed deep into the vat, down where the chemistry is most active, where the transformation will occur. The wool must go completely under the surface. This is crucial. Any fibers left exposed to the air will not dye properly. So the pole is pushed down, down, until even the end where the wool is attached has disappeared beneath the yellow-green liquid. Only the upper portion of the pole remains visible, held at an angle, the dyer's hands gripping it firmly to maintain the position. And now, the waiting. The wool must remain submerged in the woad vat for a specific period. Not too short, or the dye will not penetrate deeply enough. Not too long, or the fibers can be damaged by the alkaline nature of the fermentation. The dyer counts silently, or perhaps watches the movement of shadows on the wall, or simply feels the passage of time in his bones, developed through years of practice. While the wool is submerged, the workshop continues around this moment of stillness. Other vats bubble and steam. Workers move about their tasks. The fires crackle. But here, at the woad vat, there is a quality of suspended animation, of breath held, of waiting for something that is happening invisibly, unknowably, in the green-yellow depths. The liquid in the vat is cool compared to the scalding heat of the madder bath. If you were to slip your hand into it, you would feel it as lukewarm, body temperature, or slightly below. But you would also feel its texture, slippery and strange, alkaline in a way that makes your skin feel different, slightly soapy. This is the fermentation, the chemical processes that have transformed simple plant matter into a dye bath capable of creating one of the most prized colors in the medieval world. The time comes to lift the wool. The dyer's muscles tense, preparing for the weight. The pole is raised slowly, carefully, maintaining its angle, bringing the submerged wool back toward the surface. It emerges gradually, the topmost portions appearing first, still dripping with the yellow-green liquid. And the color of the wool is wrong. It is not blue. It is not even close to blue. The wool that emerges from the woad vat is a sickly yellow-green, darker than the liquid, but in the same family of color. It looks like the wool has been dyed the color of pond scum, of algae, of something organic and vaguely unpleasant. For someone unfamiliar with the woad process, this moment would be devastating. All that preparation, all that waiting, and the result is this muddy, unappealing green. But the dyer does not panic, does not show concern. Instead, he continues lifting the pole, bringing more and more of the wool out of the vat until the entire skein hangs above the surface, dripping steadily back into the yellow-green liquid below. The drops fall with soft sounds, splashing gently, creating ripples that spread across the metallic surface sheen. And then the magic begins, because the color is starting to change. It is subtle at first, easy to miss if you are not watching for it. The yellow-green takes on a faint teal quality, a hint of blue beginning to assert itself against the green. The change is not uniform. It starts at the edges of the drips, where the wet wool meets the air most intensely. There, the color shifts first, darkening, cooling, moving through the spectrum from yellow toward blue. The transformation accelerates. What was teal becomes turquoise. What was turquoise becomes aqua. The green is fading, being replaced, overwhelmed by blue that seems to bloom from within the fibers. The color deepens, lightens in some spots where the dye is thinner, intensifies in others where it has concentrated, but always moving toward blue. This is oxidation. This is chemistry happening in real time, visible to the naked eye. The woad dye in its reduced state, the state it takes in the oxygen-poor environment of the fermentation vat, is yellow-green. But when exposed to air, to oxygen, it transforms. The molecules rearrange. The color changes, and blue emerges like a butterfly from a chrysalis, inevitable and miraculous. The dyer holds the pole steady, giving the wool time to fully oxidize. The color continues to develop. What was light blue darkens to medium blue. What was medium blue deepens to royal blue. The transformation takes minutes, but they are hypnotic minutes, impossible to look away from. You can watch individual threads changing color, can see the blue spreading like water through the cream-colored base of the wool, can witness the exact moment when enough oxygen has reached the dye molecules to complete the transformation. The final color is magnificent, a deep, rich blue that carries in it echoes of the sky on a clear day, of deep water, of precious stones. This is the color that kings and queens desire, that merchants pay fortunes for, that marks wealth and status as surely as gold or silver. And it was created through patience, through understanding processes that seem like magic, but are rooted in chemistry as predictable as the sunrise. The wool is not yet finished, though. A single dip produces a light blue, pretty but not deep enough for the most valuable cloth. For darker blues, for that intense royal color that commands the highest prices, the process must be repeated. The wool, still blue from its first dip, is lowered back into the vat. It disappears again into that yellow-green liquid. It is held. It is raised. And again it emerges looking wrong, looking green, the blue seemingly erased by the immersion. But again the air works its magic. The blue returns, but deeper now, built on the foundation of the first dip. The color intensifies, layer upon layer, dip after dip. Some wools are dipped a dozen times or more. Each immersion adds another layer of blue, another degree of intensity. The dyer counts these dips carefully, knows exactly how many are needed to achieve each shade, from the palest sky blue to the darkest midnight. The rhythm of dipping becomes meditative. Lower the wool. Wait. Raise the wool. Watch the color develop. Lower again. The pole becomes an extension of the dyer's body, the motion as natural as breathing. Between dips, the excess liquid must be allowed to drain. The wool is held above the vat, tilted to encourage the yellow-green dye to run off, back into the reservoir below. The drops fall steadily, creating a rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop carrying with it dye that will be reabsorbed by the vat, that will be available for the next batch of wool. Nothing is wasted. Every resource is precious. Other workers tend other woad vats, creating a strange choreography across this section of the workshop. Poles rise and fall at different rhythms, creating a visual pattern of motion. Wool in various stages of oxidation hangs from the poles, showing the progression from yellow-green to blue. The air here tastes different than in the madder section, carries that earthy, fermented scent rather than the sharp chemical notes of the heated dyes. When the wool has been dipped enough times, when the blue has reached the desired intensity, it is removed from the pole and taken to another area for rinsing. But the rinsing of woad-dyed wool is gentler than the rinsing of madder. The blue of woad is more delicate in its first hours, needs time to fully set before it can withstand aggressive handling. So the rinse water is cool, the handling careful, the movements deliberate. The rinse water from woad turns blue immediately, though a lighter, weaker blue than the wool itself. This is the excess dye washing away, the particles that clung to the surface but did not penetrate, did not bond. Multiple rinses are needed, just as with madder, each one carrying away more of the loose pigment until the water runs clear. But clear in this case means faintly blue, the tiniest tinge of color that shows the dye's reluctance to fully release its claim on the water. Now comes a different kind of work, the wringing. Because the wool is heavy with water, saturated, and before it can be hung to dry properly, much of this water must be removed. The wringing is done by hand, by strong hands that know exactly how much pressure to apply, how to twist the wool to express the water without damaging the fibers. A dyer takes a skein of freshly rinsed blue wool. It is cold now, the rinse water having cooled it. It is heavy, almost impossibly heavy, the weight of the absorbed water making it droop and sag. He begins to twist. His hands work in opposite directions, one turning clockwise, the other counterclockwise, creating a spiral tension in the wool that squeezes the water out from between the fibers. The water emerges in a stream at first, a steady flow that splashes onto the stone floor. The sound is distinctive, splash, a wet, heavy sound that echoes slightly in the space. As more water is expelled, the stream becomes a series of large drops. Splash, splash. The drops hit the stone and spread, creating puddles that catch the light from the fires and the openings above. The ringing continues, the dyer's hands moving along the length of the skein, working systematically from one end to the other. More water falls. The individual drops become faster, creating a rhythm. Splash, drip, drip. Splash, drip, drip. The blue water spreads across the stone floor, mixing with the water from other skeins being wrung nearby, creating a small stream that flows toward the drain that will carry it away to the river. The physical effort is considerable. The wringing requires strength, sustained pressure, the kind of grip that makes forearms burn and hands ache. But it is necessary. Wool hung to dry while still fully saturated would take days to dry fully, would risk mildew, would stretch and distort under its own weight. The wringing removes enough water to make the drying practical while leaving the wool damp enough that the fibers remain aligned, remain ready to be carded and spun once dry. As each skein is wrung, it is set aside, lighter now but still damp, still cool to the touch. The blue seems even more intense without the excess water diluting it, the color locked into the fibers, permanent now, ready to withstand years of use. The pile of wrung wool grows, blue skeins stacked carefully to prevent tangling, to maintain their form. Other colors join the blue, because the workshop is dyeing multiple batches, creating a range of hues. There is red wool from the madder vats, already dried from earlier in the day. There is yellow wool, dyed with weld or saffron, depending on the desired intensity and the client's budget. There is green wool, created by first dyeing with weld for yellow, and then dipping in woad for blue, the two colors combining in the fibers to create shades that range from lime to forest, depending on the proportions. The drying field is adjacent to the workshop, an open space where wooden racks have been built specifically for this purpose. The racks are simple but sturdy, horizontal poles suspended between vertical posts, creating rows of space where wool can be draped without touching the ground. The field is positioned to catch the breeze that comes off the river, to allow air circulation that will speed the drying process. The workers carry the damp wool from the workshop to the drying field. It is cooler here, outside the steamy confines of the workspace, though the day is still warm, the summer sun beating down from a sky that is the same color as the best woad-dyed wool. The air is fresher here. carrying the scent of the river and the fields beyond the city walls, a relief after hours of breathing the thick, chemical-laden atmosphere of the workshop. The first skein of blue is draped over a rack, then another beside it, then red, then yellow, then green, then another blue. The colors begin to create a pattern, a rainbow that emerges organically from the practical need to space the wool properly for drying. The wet fibers glisten in the sunlight, each one catching the light slightly differently, creating subtle variations in shade within each color. More and more wool joins the display. The racks fill with color, transforming the drying field into a spectacle. Blues of every shade, from pale to dark, reds from pink to burgundy, yellows from cream to gold, greens in a dozen variations. The colors hang there, bright and vivid against the gray stone of the workshop wall, against the brown earth beneath the racks, against the blue of the sky above. The breeze picks up and the skeins begin to move. They sway gently, a slow dance on the racks. The movement creates constantly changing patterns as the skeins overlap and separate, as some catch more light while others fall into shadow. The visual effect is mesmerizing. A living rainbow, breathing with the wind, shifting and settling and shifting again. The sound of the wool moving is soft, a gentle rustling as the damp fibers brush against each other, against the wooden racks. It is a peaceful sound, far removed from the hiss and bubble of the vats, from the crackle of the fires, from the splash of water. This is the sound of work completed, of transformation achieved, of materials waiting patiently for the next stage of their journey. As the wool dries, the colors seem to intensify. The moisture that dulled them slightly evaporates, leaving behind pure pigment bonded to pure fiber. The blue becomes bluer. The red becomes redder. The colors achieve their full potential, the final expression of all the work that went into creating them. Birds land on the racks occasionally, adding splashes of brown and gray and white to the artificial rainbow, then launching themselves back into the air when a worker approaches. The sun moves across the sky. The shadows shift. The wool continues to dry, the dampness leaving the fibers slowly, carried away on the breeze. By late afternoon, the first skeins hung in the morning are dry enough to touch without leaving your hand wet. They are still cool, still holding a memory of the water they absorbed, but they are ready to be taken in, to be stored, to be sold or sent to the next stage of processing. But not all the wool is dry yet. The later batches still drip slightly when the wind moves them, still show darker patches where moisture concentrates. They will need the rest of the afternoon, and perhaps the evening before they are ready. Some might even hang overnight, drying under the stars, watched over by a worker who sleeps nearby to ensure no one steals these valuable, colorful treasures. Inside the workshop, the work is winding down. The sun is setting, and the light coming through the openings takes on a golden quality, warm and soft. The fires beneath the vats are allowed to burn down. The furious roaring of the morning and afternoon gives way to a gentler crackling as the flames consume the last of the fuel and begin to die. The water in the vats stops boiling, the violent bubbling settling to a simmer and then to stillness. The heat that has dominated the workshop all day begins to dissipate. It happens slowly, almost reluctantly, the warmth clinging to the stone walls, to the metal vats, to the thick, humid air. But gradually, incrementally, the temperature drops. Not to coolness, not yet, but to something more bearable. The workers, who have been sweating constantly for hours, begin to feel the difference. Their skin starts to dry. Their breathing comes easier. The steam that has filled the upper reaches of the workshop begins to thin. Without the constant generation of new steam from boiling vats, what remains gradually dissipates, drifting out through the openings in the roof, condensing on the cooler stone of the ceiling and dripping back down. The visibility improves. The far end of the workshop, which has been a hazy, indistinct realm all day, becomes clear. You can see individual tools hanging on the walls, can make out the features of workers across the space. The workers themselves begin their own process of winding down. Tools are cleaned and stored. The paddles are scrubbed to remove any remaining dye, then hung on pegs driven into the wall. The mortars and pestles are washed out, the residue of madder and alum and woad removed, so they will be ready for tomorrow's work. The floors are swept, the accumulated ash and dust and spilled dye pushed toward the drains. The vats are checked one final time. The woad vat gets a fresh layer of bran scattered across its surface, food for the fermentation to consume overnight, keeping the process active and ready for tomorrow. The madder vat is left to cool naturally, the remaining dye bath still usable for lighter shades tomorrow if needed. The mordant bath is covered to prevent debris from falling into it overnight. The workers strip off their dye-stained tunics, the fabric stiff with dried sweat and colored by the inevitable splashes and spills that come with this work. They rinse themselves with cool water from buckets, washing away the worst of the grime and the residual chemicals that have coated their skin. The water that runs off them is faintly colored, blue from woad, pink from madder, a testament to how thoroughly the dyes permeate everything in this place. Clean tunics are pulled on, simple garments reserved for the walk home, for the evening hours away from the workshop. The workers gather their belongings, small bundles that might contain food for tomorrow, personal items, tools they are responsible for maintaining. They exchange words, quiet conversation about tomorrow's work, about what needs to be prepared, about problems that arose today and solutions that need to be implemented. One by one, they depart. The workshop empties. The sound of footsteps fades as workers head out into the city, toward homes and families and meals and rest. Soon, only one or two remain, the designated watchers who will stay through the night, tending the woad vat, ensuring the fires stay completely out, protecting the valuable dyes and equipment from theft or accident. The workshop in the evening is a different place than it was during the day. The frantic energy is gone, replaced by a profound stillness. The silence is almost complete, broken only by the occasional settling creak of cooling metal, the drip of condensation, the distant sound of the river flowing past. The light fades, the golden sunset glow giving way to the blue-gray of twilight. Outside, in the drying field, the rainbow of wool hangs motionless in the still evening air. The breeze has died down as the sun set, and now the skeins drape heavy and straight on their racks. The colors are muted by the fading light, but still visible, still beautiful. The blues and reds and yellows and greens create a pattern that seems almost deliberate, almost artistic, though it emerged purely from the practical needs of the drying process. The night watchman makes his rounds. He checks each vat, ensuring everything is secure. He tests the temperature of the metal, making sure the fires are truly out and not smoldering dangerously. He steps outside to check the drying wool, running his hands over a few skeins to gauge their dryness, making mental notes about what will be ready to bring in first thing tomorrow morning. The workshop is warm still. The heat of the day's work has soaked into every surface, into the stone floors and walls, into the wooden beams overhead, into the copper vats and iron fire grates. This heat radiates outward slowly, maintaining a temperature that is comfortable even as the night air outside grows cooler. The humidity remains high, the moisture that has been pumped into the air all day condensing now, creating a gentle dampness that makes everything feel soft, peaceful. The watchman settles into his usual spot, a corner where he can see the entrance to the workshop and has access to a simple pallet for sleeping. He does not expect trouble. The workshop is known, respected, protected by guild regulations and city watch patrols. But his presence is still necessary, still valued. He lights a single small lamp, just enough to see by if he needs to move around, not enough to disturb the gentle darkness that has settled over the space. The vats sit silent in the dimness, their contents invisible but still present. The woad vat continues its slow fermentation, the invisible organisms consuming the bran, maintaining the chemistry that will allow more blue to be created tomorrow. The madder vat holds its red dye bath, cooling degree by degree, the color locked in the liquid, waiting for the next batch of wool to transform. The mordant bath, covered and still, contains its mixture of alum and water, ready to prepare more fibers for dyeing. The tools hang on their pegs, clean and ready. The mortars sit empty, their stone surfaces bearing the faint stains of countless grinding sessions. The paddles lean against the walls, their worn wood testament to years of stirring, of keeping wool moving through dye baths. Everything is in its place. Everything is prepared for tomorrow's work to begin again. Outside, the wool continues its slow drying. The night air, though cooler than the day, is still warm enough that the process continues. Moisture evaporates slowly from the fibers, molecule by molecule, carried away on the occasional breeze that stirs in the darkness. The colors, invisible in the night, but still present, still true, wait patiently to be revealed again by tomorrow's sunrise. The river flows past, its surface reflecting starlight when the clouds part. The water carries tonight a mixture of colors, the accumulated runoff from today's work. Pink from the madder rinses, blue from the woad, yellow from the weld. All these colors mingle in the current, diluting as they flow, dispersing into the larger body of the river, eventually reaching the sea where they will become part of something vast and infinite. In the city beyond the dyer's district, people sleep wearing clothes dyed in this workshop or ones like it. Red tunics that mark guild membership, blue cloaks that signify wealth, yellow scarves that add brightness to otherwise drab clothing, green stockings that show fashion sense and disposable income. The dyes have spread from these workshops into the world, transforming the visual landscape of medieval life, adding color to celebrations and ceremonies, marking distinctions between rich and poor, noble and common, clergy and laity. But here, in this quiet moment, in this still night, those grand uses and implications fade into irrelevance. Here, there is only the workshop, warm and humid, filled with the tools and materials of transformation. Here, there are only the vats with their contents, the racks with their hanging wool, the fires reduced to ash, the work complete for the day. The watchman's breathing slows as he drifts towards sleep. The lamp flame gutters lower, fed by an oil reservoir that will last through the night. The darkness deepens, becomes complete, wrapping the workshop in gentle obscurity. The sounds of the city fade until only the most distant noises remain, the occasional bark of a dog, the call of a night watch patrol, the endless whisper of the river. The warmth persists, the humidity persists, the safety of these solid walls, this secure space persists. Tomorrow will bring new work, new batches of wool to transform, new colors to create. But tomorrow is hours away, separated from this moment by the gift of night, by the restorative power of rest, by the simple pleasure of stillness after a day of constant motion. The wool hangs in the darkness, the fibers continuing their slow release of moisture, continuing their transformation from wet to dry, from newly dyed to ready for use. The colors are locked in now, permanent, a testament to skill and knowledge and the patient application of ancient techniques. Red and blue and yellow and green, each one a small miracle of chemistry and craft, each one a victory over the gray and brown monotony of the medieval world. And as the colors dry in the night air, bright and true, the fires turn to ash. The work is done and you are safe. Sleep well.